The run up to COP28 this year has started, and this is one of the pre COP episodes that we are doing. And we are talking to young climate leaders about what they think of climate negotiations. We have Heeta Lakhani with us. She's one of the 17 climate leaders whom the UN has recognized. So it's Be the Change campaign. She is also an elected global focal point of the youth climate movement, which is a constituency of the UNFFC. We also have Rakesh Kamal with us. Rakesh is the editor of Climate Emergency. He's covered climate negotiations in the past. Hida, I want to begin with you. Uh, when exactly did you realize that you need to speak for the environment? We all had our own time when we used to started reading about climate and what it means, because I'm also kind of young only, and I started reading it at some point. But I want to know your story. When exactly you started thinking about it? Any story that you have from your childhood, tell us everything.
Yeah, thank you. Um, well, for me, climate came much later, but environment had always been a big part of what I wanted and what I was actually just. I like being, and kids like to be out in the open. They like to be in nature, and I was one of those. Even on birthdays, for example, like I remember, uh, you know, looking after an injured bird or something. So it wasn't really like. I mean, it was part of my day to day. It wasn't something different. But when I was around 13, I think I was coming back home from school and I lived in Bombay, and there was a beautification project of Marine Drive that was going on. And they were taking out these coconut palm trees that lined the coast. And they were either transplanting them or putting them somewhere else to make way for the Marine Drive and to build what we see today as the promenade. And that's when, I was coming back home that afternoon and there was this huge coconut palm tree on a trailer. So instead of being vertical, it was lying horizontal. Its roots were out. The leaves, of course, you could see the whole tree from root to the leaves, but lying horizontal. And that image until today, it's stuck in my head. And that shook me. I felt very hopeless. I didn't know what to do. And I remember when I came home, I was in tears, and my mom had to actually console me that afternoon. And of course that didn't lead to anything, but that stayed with me. And I think it was that experience when I was, jokingly, I think somebody told me, oh, if you care so much, why don't you be an environmentalist? So I think that stuck in my head. And I think ever since I was 12 or 13, I kept telling people, oh, I'm going to grow up to be an environmentalist without even fully understanding what it meant. So I think that's where it started. There was one memory that I remember clearly many, many years ago. And then, of course, I did a master's in environmental studies. I wanted to, study it ever since when I started, you know, deciding what I want to do my degree. And I eventually decided not to pursue this in my bachelor's, because sometimes, you feel like you want to do something as a child, but then your passion and your interest might be very different than what you actually want to do. But eventually that stayed, and so I did a master's in the field. And after master's was when I got more involved in the climate space. So climate came much later, but it was always more of environment or wildlife, or I was initially actually thinking of maybe conservation. So that was a different sector, and then sort of climate, I think, came to me as I got more involved in the UN since 2015, and yeah, since then I wouldn't think of anything else now.
Yeah, that's nice. Where did you do your masters?
I did my master's at Terry University, New Delhi.
Hey, that's great. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like as children, we start seeing the things around us, and then something, for some people it stuck. And I'm glad you took up environmental science and continue to do what you're doing. So from there, how did you get into climate negotiations? I mean, because I know a lot of people do environment science. A lot of people also, then get into, like you said, conservation or into policy work and stuff like that. But how climate negotiations happen?
So I think the initial bit was by chance. So in 2015, so after I finished, I graduated from my master's 2014. So it's been a little while. And then I was then working actually as a German language translator for a multinational corporation in Bombay. So I was doing nothing related to the environment. But this was when COP21 was about to take place in 2015, and there was a buzz in the media like a few months before, in the lead up to it, climate summit with lots of expectations, world leaders are expected to be there, and the whole sort of the media noise that started building up by then. So I got a little, I mean, I got curious. I didn't exactly know what happens at the negotiations, but I mean, it clearly felt like this is the place to be. So I started asking people on like how I could be there. I looked online to register, and now, of course, I laugh at myself because I know the process behind it. But as a naive, like newbie, I had no idea what to do. So I asked around, and eventually, I think by like a few weeks, a few days before the COP was supposed to begin, I think a week before, someone wrote to me and said, "Okay, we can give you a badge for 1 week."
Wow.
And so that I remember I was in the office when the phone call came. So from the office, I booked my ticket to Paris. When I spent my one salary to like just go to Paris and come back. So I was there
Hmm.
for a week. I also went for the conference of youth that happened before, for a few days
Hmm.
before. That was COP 11. And more than the COP, actually, I thoroughly enjoyed the COI. Like the energy, the passion, the whole feeling that the out of the 3 days of the COI that was there was very, very energizing, was very exciting. I had never seen so many different young people from so many different countries all in one place at the same time. So it was also a lot of learning, and understanding cultures, just meeting so many different young people.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, there was the COP where I was there for a week, and I had no training. I didn't have any capacity building, so I didn't know what to do. So, of course, I went to the COP, but was very overwhelmed with the size of the space, the sheer number of people, and of course, everything that goes on in parallel at the same time. At least like 15 things going on together at one place, and then just trying to figure out and navigating that. Um,
Yeah.
so that was quite a challenge, but I think that's when I came back, the UN wasn't, or the negotiations were not my focus. But when I came back, um, I was reflecting, and I wanted to be back in the environment sector, or at least, if not climate, like at least in the environment sector.
Hmm.
So a few months later, I quit, and then I started volunteering, and that's where I think I got more and more involved. And then in 2016, so the next year, I was with a youth delegation who was sending a delegation to COP. So I was again there for another week in 2016, and this really helped because I was with other young people. When I went in 2015, I
Hmm.
was by myself. I didn't know anybody else, and it was the first time I had been internationally to a UN conference of this scale
Hmm.
and size.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it was overwhelming, intimidating, all of that. For the next year, it
Hmm.
really helped because I met other young people. I, found a sort of community.
Yeah.
And even though I had seen the youth constituency, I was at COI and I had sort of engaged in their sessions. I was a very shy kid to like walk up to somebody and ask, "How do I become a part of this?"
Hmm.
So that sense of community really helped me. That sort of got me more involved, in the youth constituency, which is called Yango. So after COP as well, I came back. I was already had joined the mailing list, so I, joined a few working groups and got engaged more and more. And then I think from then it was just sort of an upward sort of learning curve for me. So extreme in being more and more involved in the working groups, understanding the processes. Then also going to the intersessions in 2017. So between the COPs,
Hmm.
between the
Yeah.
negotiations, they have the intersessions. So I started getting engaged more, so then understanding the negotiations, actually sitting in the rooms, trying to find online like the documents. So then I
Yeah.
think it was a very steep but very organic learning curve. And then in 2019 at COP25 was when I was elected as Young of Focal Point. So I now finished my mandate after COP26. I finished my mandate after the pandemic, and now working with young people on the other side of the room. So not as young people as observers, but youth as negotiators this time.
But Ita, this is one thing that I want to understand. I mean, it's of course a long story and it's an after story. But because I heard you in one of your interviews, you said that even after having a graduate degree in environmental science, you really struggle to understand climate negotiations, which I think is the same story for all those who are just beginning to kind of read all of it. Very complicated things, words thrown left, right, center, and understanding it becomes quite difficult. So I want to understand from you. I mean, how did you figure that out at that initial stage? Now, of course, you have come very far, but at that stage, what did you do to understand it? Plus, how should other people get involved in it? Because I see, and I am sure you also meet a lot of other youngsters who might want to kind of get into this space. So, what is the way?
So for me, it was for me actually a lot of it just I had to learn on the go. Because initially when I got more and more involved, it was the youth constituency that sort of helped. Of course, I met a lot of young people, and like some of them were very helpful. Like I remember sitting in the rooms where someone was, actually trying to explain to me what was happening. Even when you're sitting in a negotiation room with all of the different words and the commas and the brackets and all of that, like if you don't have the sort of initial, like, how do you say, like the outline of how to figure it out, it can take
Yes,
forever to
and
get
there's a
it
lot
done.
of
So
referencing that they do. This happened that year, and then you have to kind of follow up. So,
yeah, so that really helped for me. Basically, I think the biggest thing that supported was, or the biggest sort of upward curve for me was the fact that I had a few friends. It wasn't like a large number, but I had a few friends who were open to teaching me and sort of holding my hand and guiding me through the way. So basically capacity building, and this, it came very informally. Like I didn't undergo a capacity building course, and maybe if I had done some training beforehand, had I received capacity building, it probably would have been easier already, like at the start, to navigate at least a little bit. I wouldn't have taken so long. So I think this is one thing that has stuck with me throughout. And there are, I mean, basically two outcomes of that. One is just training and capacity building. The second is just having a sense of community, which we've now tried to do in the program that I've co-founded recently. But basically, I think for every young person getting involved, um, this has always been my thing. Like I think one is, of course, now there are a lot more training programs available. So even, I mean, even a lot of like data, or not data, but necessarily information, is like people are trying to simplify it, putting it out on social media. The youth constituency, which is Yango, does before COP, does a few training sessions on, like, understanding what's going to happen at that COP. Its working group presents on, like, what are the big thematics and what is to be looked at. So there is a lot more, like, even dissemination of information available than, let's say, even back in 2015. And before that, I'm sure it was a lot more harder anyways. um, so I think the first step for anyone wanting to get involved is, like, try and find out where you can. It can be through Yango, it could be through other youth networks, youth organizations, or whatever that might be. But try and find some amount of training, because when you go there, the COP is overwhelming. It is one of the most overwhelming spaces that you'll step into. So having a little bit of framework around that really helps, rather than just going in like a headless chicken. And then I think that the other is just, and this is where youth networks come in handy, because you meet other people, around the same age as you. You can talk. You of course learn about different cultures, but you make friends, and friendship really helps to just make sure that you're doing okay when it's such an intense day. Or just if you can't find something, maybe someone else has access to a particular document, or knows, as simple as, like, where can you go buy something, or where is the nearest supermarket or the nearest doctor, for example, if you need help. So things like this. I think these are the two initial things that if you can get hold of, and then of course, you can then see and pick and find pieces that are most useful for you.
yeah, and of course, I think there's one more thing. You've already talked about it, but I also want to understand why and how, because we know that, COP is basically coming together of all the climate world leaders, and, you know, very important people talking about very complex things. So why do, and I also see that there's a lot of conversation that has started happening. The push up is really strong about how young people should join this conversation. So why do they matter? And what is it that when, let's say, a very young person like me or you, we go there, what is it that we contribute to that negotiation that is happening there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the first thing is to understand. I mean, you're only able to contribute to a COP if you understand how it works. And which is why I've constantly emphasized that training or capacity building, or whatever you want to call it, knowledge building, is really, really important before you go into a COP. And then is also, second is expectation settings. So one is, like, you understand the framework and you know how things are working, at least a little bit. At least you get some sort of an idea before you go in. And the second is, like, really setting your expectations right, because when you go into a COP, um, the countries come with their positions set months before the COP. So when you go into a COP, as a young person, and I've spoken to so many young people over the years who go, like, I need to be at COP28 because I want to make change at what the outcome is going to be. And that's really not going to be the case. If you want to make change at the COP, you need to get involved, a few months, or at least a year, or maybe even more than that before. So if you get involved today at COP28, by the time you understand and you can make, you're able to even make, a tiny 0.1% of change, it's probably going to take until COP29 at the earliest. At the earliest, it's going to take a year. So, because the space is complex, you need to understand how people work, you need to understand negotiators, you need to understand dynamics, who do you approach for what. And the reason is because when you go there as a young person, more often than not, you're not going as a negotiator, you're not going as a decision maker, you're going in as an observer, which means that you can observe the negotiations, you can lobby, you can advocate, you can do a lot of behind the scene conversations, but you are not sitting at the decision making tables, you're not making those decisions, unfortunately. And we need to have both sides of things. We need to have young people in the rooms making the decisions for their countries. And then we need to have young people outside who are not necessarily bound by country positions, bound by rules of what they can and cannot say. And then have the liberty to really, push, go the extra mile and call countries out or call people out, or, actually like, be as open as any young person would like to be. So understanding what your role is going to be at a COP is very important to really set expectations right and say, I'm going to go and okay, probably like, engage in side events, speak there, but that doesn't mean that negotiators are going to hear me in the side events. There could be a negotiator at the side event, but more often than not, people in the room are not going to be negotiators. So you're not going to like by saying brilliant statements in the side events, it may or may not actually percolate into the negotiating rooms. So just which is why you need to understand, which is why the training is so important to really know where are the areas that you want to engage, where are the areas that can actually make change. Like going in and saying, I'm going to go to COP and I have like 3 events to speak at and 5 media interviews and I'm going to make change is really like, yes, you might have a lot of media headlines, but you're not going to make change in the room. So I think that is just like setting that right for young people is very very important, because then that helps you when you go in, like you know what to expect. Otherwise you go in with big hopes, you come out dejected, you come out feeling like the system is broken, which sometimes it is and it needs fixing, but then you get a very negative, how do you say, it's like a bitter aftertaste, and then it stops young people from engaging in the process, which is the exact opposite of what we want. So I think that it's very important to have that clarity before you go in, rather than just thinking of something and then being very, very disappointed by the end of it.